It sounds like the sequel to the 80s drug thriller Scarface, but instead of Miami, this one is about a war raging along the U.S. border with Mexico, and it's very real. More than 23,000 dead, more than 100 tons of cocaine seized, and more than $1/3 of $1 trillion that an American bank moved from Mexican currency exchange companies used by drug cartels. It's all in the latest issue of Bloomberg Markets magazine. The bank is WACHOVIA, now a unit of Wells Fargo. Wells Fargo has admitted in court that WACHOVIA failed to report suspected money laundering by narcotics traffickers. That includes the cash used to buy 4 planes that shipped 22 tons of cocaine. According to prosecutors, here's how one deal worked. Drug smugglers in Mexico City wired $300,000 from a currency exchange to a WACHOVIA branch in Miami. Then they wired money from that branch to a Bank of America branch in Oklahoma City. The money was used to buy a DC-9, which then flew from St. Petersburg, Florida, to Caracas. The plane then transported 5.7 tons of cocaine, valued at about $100 million, to Mexico. There, the crew was arrested. WACHOVIA has admitted it didn't do enough to spot illicit funds while handling $378 billion from Mexican currency exchange firms over a 3-year period. Wells Fargo, WACHOVIA's new owner, has paid $160 million in fines and penalties. If Wells Fargo keeps its pledge to improve its anti-money laundering procedures, prosecutors have promised to drop all charges by next March.
We've been talking about U.S. banking involvement in the Mexican drug wars, and as our story in Bloomberg Markets magazine tells it, and Sue Keenan was mentioning, there was a plane, a DC-9, that was packed with drugs and money that was busted by the authorities, and that plane had been bought with laundered funds that they were transferred through WACHOVIA and Bank of America. We are rejoined now by Martin Woods, formerly at WACHOVIA. He served as director of WACHOVIA's anti-money laundering unit in London, and he left the bank after he was displeased with how executives responded to his talking about what was going on. Martin, talk to us about some of the deferred prosecution agreements that have been happening in these types of cases. What exactly are they, and do they do anything to deter future activity like this?
Well, similarly to UBS, WACHOVIA has entered into an agreement with the authorities to implement an enhanced anti-money laundering program, and in exchange for compliance with that, the prosecutors will not instigate the prosecutorial action. The problem being that the actual bankers, and we must remember it's people, bankers, that launder money, not machines, not actually the paper itself. It's the actions of individuals that launder the money. Nobody's held accountable. And I said recently at a conference in Miami, in effect, the bankers are having a free play at the roulette table using somebody else's money. And in the event that they win, they share in the profits. But when they lose, they walk away from the action with no consequence to their own actions.
Speaking about consequences, Martin, I'm curious if you're at all concerned for your own safety as a consequence of speaking out about this.
I'm not now. I was at the time through lack of knowledge and understanding of some of the bigger issues. I'm a long, long way away from Mexico. I don't anticipate holidaying in Mexico anytime soon. I have no fear for my safety or for that of my family.
Martin,
primarily because of geography.
Yeah, right. Martin, might I ask, because what we're seeing here, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but there is a direct link between the banks laundering this money and the violence that we see taking effect. State Department figures say that since President Calderon's been in office since 2006, some 22,000 people have been killed.
Actually, I read the Sunday Times in London on Sunday, and they estimate that incrementally the deaths have gone up by 80% year-on-year since 2007 through to 2009, which is a very bad trend. It is a big picture. You have to see and go back to the origins of all our legislation about money laundering. The objective was to take the proceeds out of the crime, to take away the incentive to commit the crime. The fact that the money's being laundered, it's going back across the border, and Hillary Clinton recognised this when she spoke in March last year, and clearly stated that some of that money is being used to buy the guns that are killing police officers. It causes some of us to ask the question, just how close are the launderer's fingers to the trigger of the killer's gun?
Martin, how does this turn out? Are more whistleblowers going to have to speak up? Because as we want to mention, this was not just something that was endemic to Wachovia. As Julie mentioned, other banks involved as well. Are people going to have the courage to speak up and point this out?
Well, I'd like to thank John Dugan, the comptroller, for a very gratifying letter that he gave to me. But as my own regulator, the Financial Services Authority in London, I'm almost at war with the people, and I actually genuinely believe they actually have no interest in human intelligence. They push it away, and their actual welfare and support program for whistleblowers is in fact a referral to a charity. As an enforcement agency, they're not equipped to deal with, they're not in the business of cultivating human intelligence. And if I just may for one moment contrast that, as a police officer, we were reliant upon human intelligence, and last year the Metropolitan Police in London ran a campaign based upon silence.
Yeah.
And the silence was the sound of a bomb not going off because Mrs. Smith from number 4 Dover Street called the police.
Right.
They cultivate human intelligence because of the impact it has, whereas regulators don't look for it.
And Martin, I'm sorry, we're going to have to leave it there. Martin Woods, former anti-money laundering officer for Wachovia. Thank you so much. And that
really fascinating story, Monica. Thank you. Well, joining me now is the author of that article in Bloomberg Markets Magazine, Michael Smith. He's on the phone right now from Santiago, Chile. And Michael, thanks for joining us. And, you know, reading about Wachovia's involvement in this, why was it a target of these Mexican drug cartels?
Well, I don't know if Wachovia itself was a target. It's more the currency exchange houses which were banked by Wachovia. And it's a very vulnerable industry, and it was open to corruption, and they got in there and found a bank willing to move money for them around the world, wherever they needed to move money.
And what happened at Wachovia? I mean, why did their anti-money laundering efforts fail here?
Well, if you look at the deferred prosecution agreement, you'll see that they understaffed their compliance department, which was in charge of overseeing and watching over all this money for suspicious transactions. But more importantly, there was a conflict between the people who ran the business and the people who were supposed to watch over for suspicious activity. There were several warnings by the compliance people they had on staff that these cartels were using the bank to launder money, and they were basically vetoed by the people who ran the businesses.
But why was that? What do you mean conflict?
Well, because the people that were running this business, which is called correspondent banking, in other words, handling all these transfers and charging fees, you know, they're compensated for volumes of business.
I see. Okay.
And so when the compliance people said, hey, you should close these accounts, we were suspicious, you know, my impression was that they were thinking more about their bonuses and not really thinking hard about what was going on.
Right. They were thinking that they were going to make a lot of money, though, out of the transfer of this cash.
Exactly.
Michael, could any bank, though, in the U.S. here, couldn't any bank be susceptible to this?
Yes, all banks are susceptible, and all banks have massive, any big, reputable bank has a significant compliance department. Sometimes hundreds of people who are paid to watch over these transactions for suspicious activity. But, the drug dealers are very clever, and they keep finding ways to circumvent those systems and to play around with the vulnerabilities inside any bank.
Okay, Michael, we'll have to leave it there, but great to talk with you, and a really fascinating article. That was Bloomberg Markets Magazine senior writer Michael Smith, and you can see more of that story in the latest Markets Magazine.